centerfold is now under a death fatwa like Salman Rushdie. And that means, he's the one who wrote the satanic verses that so offended Muslims. And that means that Muslims within the jurisdiction of the fatwa are under binding order to implement it if they can, which means that all Muslims are killed upon now to kill this centerfold from Playboy magazine. Dhimmi, I have to explain. This is one of the most important concepts within Islam. It is, literally it means protection. The word dhimmi means protection. You all saw The Godfather, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what protection is when it comes to organized crime or buying insurance from organized crime? It means your house looks like it could easily catch fire and burn. You should get some insurance from us, and in fact, we'll protect your house and we'll make sure it doesn't burn. Okay? I don't think I need insurance. I'm not going to pay you. I guarantee you the next day your house is going to burn. And that's how protection works under dhimmi. You say, okay, I don't want to convert. You've captured me. I don't want to convert. I don't want to be a slave. So I'll accept dhimmi, which is a slave status with certain protection. As long as you behave as a good slave, they won't kill you. And that's the form of oppression that Islam has practiced over the whole world that they've conquered for many centuries. It's never changed. It's very harsh. I'm going to give you some examples, but while it's fresh in my mind, I'm going to point something out that I wrote an article on that I don't think very many people realize. There are almost no Jews living under Islam. Why is that? 1,000 years ago, more than 90% of the world's Jews were Sephardic Jews. And that is there are two branches of Jews, Sephardic and Ashkenazim. The Sephardic Jews are the Jews who lived within the Muslim regions. North Africa, Spain, places like that. They lived under the domination of Muslims. The Ashkenazim Jews arrived in the Rhine region in the 1st century and then spread through all of Europe. So all of the Jews who were subject to the Holocaust are Ashkenazim. Now we know how they've been persecuted by the Christian civilization. We know how they were exterminated by the Nazis. 1,000 years ago, less than 10% of the world's Jews were the Ashkenazim or European Jews living under Christianity. Now it's reversed. Now 90% of the world's Jews are Ashkenazims, the ones persecuted by Christians, and less than 10% are the Sephardic. And most of the remaining Sephardic Jews are found in Spain, Portugal, and southern France. So what happened? What happened to all of the Jews living peacefully under Islam all these centuries? Well,
their houses caught on fire.
Their houses caught on fire. Exactly. Simply put, they were persecuted into conversion, or they were killed, or they were able to flee. And that is, you can go to the details of the history of any region where they lived, and you'll hear all these glowing accounts by Islam about how we've always got along so well with the Jews. The Jews who lived under Islam are gone. Most of the Christians who lived under Islam disappeared the same way. The Crusades, for example, were a counter strike against the expansion of Islam, which before the First Crusade in 1096, 2/3 of all the Christian countries had been conquered by Islam. Some of you probably read the New Testament. You're familiar with the epistles of St. Paul. Have you visited any of the countries that any of the cities that he wrote those epistles to? Like Galatia, have you?
I've been in Turkey, where Ephesus and all that. Yeah.
Turkey was a Christian country. It was Anatolia, completely conquered by the Muslims. All of the cities that St. Paul wrote those letters to, every single one of them is under Islam. The histories of the sacking of some of those cities are very explicit, very brutal. Rounding the people up in churches, burning the churches, dragging the women and children off into slavery like they always did. And it was relentless. We hear people say that Islam rises every 500 years. That's nonsense. Islam has been, jihad was an annual thing. Every year For centuries, Muslims went out on jihad. Dhimitude, dhimmis. Okay, I mentioned that dhimmi status is reserved for people of the book, Christians and Jews. It's because Muhammad still thought in the beginning that he would be able to persuade Christians and Jews because he had scripture like theirs that he would persuade them to come on board. And I mentioned that the punishment for those who refuse to accept dhimitude is crucifixion or the removal of a hand and foot and eyes. Dhimmis who live within Islam and accept their slavery and go along are allowed no weapons. In the time of Muhammad, they couldn't ride on horseback, so that would mean you couldn't drive a vehicle today. They were not allowed to do any repairs to their churches, not allowed to build any new churches. They could practice their religion, but if their bells or their praying reached the Muslims, they were in deep trouble for it. And if they were caught preaching publicly, they were executed. They had to wear special clothing. In fact, the kind of patches that the Jews had to wear under the Nazis come from dhimitude. That's what Christians and Jews had to wear under the Muslims. Now, let's say you're living in dhimitude, but you've earned a lot of money, or let's say you've got a really lovely wife, and some Muslim wants your money or your wife. Guess what you just did, partner? You just threw garbage against the wall of the mosque. Or you slapped him, you assaulted him. Now, what's your defense? You're going to go into a Sharia court where you don't get to say a word. He's going to say you did it, you're convicted, and you're executed. And that's how it worked. That's also how it worked for conversion. When the Muslims captured a large number of dhimmis, and they continued to do that over a period of time, they may have reached a point where they said to themselves, you know what, we've got too many of these people here. We need either less of them or more of us. So then they would put the pressure on to convert. You threw garbage against the mosque. You're going to either have to convert right now, or we're going to have to revoke your dhimmi status. And that basically means you're dead. And so very few held out under that kind of pressure. The Copts in Egypt held out, the Christian Copts in Egypt held out because they were a large body engulfed. And also remember, Egypt was a Christian country when the Muslims came in. When they destroyed the library at Alexandria, the Muslim commander asked the caliph, he said, I found this enormous trove of books. What am I going to do with it? And the caliph said, well, either they disagree with the Quran, in which case they're heretical, or they agree with the Quran, in which case they're superfluous, so burn them. It was the largest library in the world. That was the attitude toward the West. Imagine if somebody in our government said, the Muslims are really starting to annoy us. Let's burn Mecca, or let's burn Medina, or let's blow up one of their mosques. Can you imagine the uproar? And yet Muslims think nothing of doing this. Remember when they took Afghanistan? They were blowing up all those Buddhist monuments. When they occupied the region of the Middle East, they immediately destroyed the Jewish and Christian artifacts to try to hide that history. That's just how they're trying to obliterate us, and we're trying to be polite to them. I wanted to mention something else that was just kind of a curiosity. I was talking about St. Paul's epistles. Do you know why the Galatians were called Galatians? They were Gauls. They were the same people as you would have found in Western France at that time. The world was very different. The people of the Old Testament were not the people of the Middle East, or of the New Testament, were not the people of the Middle East like what you see today. They were Europeans like what you see in this room today. But they were, under Islam, they were replaced by Mediterraneans. For example, the barbarian invasions that swept down from the northeast of Germany across Europe and through Italy, the Vandals, the Huns, the Goths, the Visigoths, they were all basically the same people, and they would have looked very much like us. The Visigoths made their way through Italy, across North Africa, and up into Spain. So the Spanish were Visigoths. Why do the Spanish look so different from other Europeans today? 500 years under Islam. Why do southern Italians look so different from northern Italians? Centuries under Islam. You know the protection racket that we talked about under Dimitude? Sicily was 300 years under Islam. I haven't researched this, but I suspect that the practice of protection was perfected in Sicily. It's just exactly what the mafia does. Now, examples of what dimitude means when a whole people fails to serve in their slave capacity properly. In the late 1800s, the Albanians started to object that the whole system was too oppressive. I should mention, Islam swept up through the Baltic region, well up into Eastern Europe, and occupied a great part of it. Much of it was taken back at the time of World War I, but Albania, for example, was under the Muslims. When you heard about the ethnic Albanians in the war in Kosovo, fighting the Serbs, and our president is bombing bridges on behalf of the ethnic Albanians, the ethnic Albanians were the Muslim invaders who came into the Baltic region and occupied all those countries in addition to Armenia, Bulgaria. They occupied them for centuries, and they kept the Christian people there under dimitude. And the Christian people after World War I gradually expanded their control of those regions, and Bill Clinton decided that just wasn't working, and the press decided it wasn't working. So they invented this theory that there was this ethnic cleansing going on, and that thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of ethnic Albanians and Bosnians were being killed. Bosnia is the southern tip of Serbia, and it was a part of a Christian region that was conquered by the Muslims. So I did some research on the internet, and I invite any and all of you to do this. Go and look for mass graves on the internet in Bosnia, in Serbia, Herzegovina, wherever you want to try to find them. Go try to find the evidence that this ever happened. What you find is a grave with 70 people in it, many of them whom they know were pulled from other graveyards and transported there for a press release. Graves that have people who were known to be combatants, all males, that kind of thing, in numbers of 20, 30, 50, but all told, no more than 2,000, including all those they knew were taken from other graveyards and killed in combat. The whole thing was a fabrication to get us to fight on the side of Islam. Or at least that's how I interpret it. If somebody can bring me evidence to the contrary, I'd be pleased to see it. I have asked many people to do that, and so far nobody has taken me up on it. Now, dhimmis paid a tax. It was called the jizya. And it was a special tax that Muslims didn't have to pay. Historically, it ran anywhere from a token amount in good times up to 50% of income paid annually. The dhimmi tax also included a thing called devshirme, and I may not be pronouncing that even close to right, D-E-V-S-H-I-R-M-E. And what that meant was about every 5th year, especially in the Balkan region, but also up into Hungary, for example, the Muslims took prepubescent boys, young boys, and they converted them by force. They kidnapped them from the families as part of the tax. They converted them by force, and they made them into what was called janissaries. And janissaries were the shock troops of the Islamic army. They were they did nothing but train in military tactics for their lives. They were the best troops the Muslims had.